I think that it's confusing to be a parent right now. I think that our parents, it was simpler for them. My family was like, hey, you do something wrong, here's a spanking, and here's a timeout. Like that was it. And there's like no tolerance for bad behavior. I was very well behaved in the moment, and it worked for short-term obedience. And there's nothing like wrong with some of that. Now the mantra is like every single thing needs to be that you're emotion coaching your kids. You need to like be like loving at all times. You can never raise your voice. Timeouts are bad. I mean, that's so confusing because I think in our core, we're like, oh, I would never behave like this. I would have never gotten away with this. So
Hey, this is Chad Namiro.
And I'm Kelley Namiro. Welcome to the Balancing Chaos podcast,
A lifestyle podcast where we will interview guests about wellness, business, and just about everything in between.
Our goal is to help you develop a lifestyle that promotes health, wholeness, and success. Through our conversations, we hope to inspire you to live a beautiful, full, and joyful life as you navigate balancing the chaos.
We hope you enjoy.
Today on the show, we have an amazing guest that I know all of you are going to be really looking forward to hearing from, Dr. Whitney. She is a private practice pediatrician and AAP Spokesperson Published Author of The Working Mom Blueprint, Medical Review Board Advisor for Prevent Magazine, host of the Modern Mommy Doc podcast, and a mom of 2 young girls. Wow, that is a lot of stuff you have going on. Dr. Whitney, thank you for being here. We're so excited to have you on. Can you give our guests a little bit more of a background on who you are and why you got into being a pediatrician? Maybe even take it back to your childhood. How did you grow up? What was that like?
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up the daughter of a high school economics teacher and an art gallery director. So two very different professions. And my mom was always a serial entrepreneur. So she always had all these big ideas for business. And I think that watching her as a young girl and as a young woman, I really saw like the possibilities are endless. And I also saw how not having kind of a clear direction for where you want to go or like a clear strategy can make it so you end up being the person who does all the hard work. You're like, you strive and you strive and you strive, and like, you still don't necessarily like make it in terms of the thing that you wanted to do. So I think that really grounded me, having my dad who was in a very set career and also super present in my life. Like my dad, was always the person who would say like, did you give it your best effort? If you did, okay, awesome. You did it. Great. That means like you did enough. He was like the founder of growth mindset before it was a cool thing. And my mom, when I went to medical school, eventually, my mom, I remember my dad saying like, well, what's plan B if you don't get into medical school? Because I've never been a great test taker, like standardized test taker. And he's like, what's plan B? And my mom's like, there is no plan B. Like one of those just like driven people who really believed that I should reach the stars. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I came from that background. My parents were very much like, believed in hard work, believed in kind of like nose to the grindstone, and really in that American dream of like, if you go for it, if you put in your full effort, then you'll be able to be whatever you want. And I think that influenced me as I got into my career. I was a journalism major because I knew that I loved writing. And I also was pre-med. So kind of like a weird duck in the realm of people who were trying to be in medicine. And the reason I did those 2 things is because I could see, even as a young person, that there was a gap between information that was understood by scientists or by doctors and the way it was communicated to the layperson. So there was like these people who were academics and who could talk about things with a lot of authority, but not a lot of people out there who could actually kind of meet people where they were in terms of either translating the information or in terms of being more real about what parts of that medical information actually matter or that you actually need to take in and apply.
Yeah.
Eventually, I became a pediatrician. And in my pediatrics practice, before I had kids, I really was believing all that stuff that my mom, bless her heart, taught me about, like leaning in fully, being like the hardest worker that you can, take a seat at the table, play with the men, like whatever role you need to play in order to like do it, that's what you do. And I was really successful at that before I had kids because I had a lot of free time, right? I could do it. I could rest on the weekends or recuperate. And once I had kids, that just all changed. And I think that I became so much more empathetic with the parents that I was seeing, and especially the moms who they would come in and ask me advice, and pre-kids, I'd be like, well, duh, this is how you do it. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I feel like I was probably in my head, like, you're stupid. Like, are you kidding me? Like, read a book, like sleep train your kid, And then once I became a parent, I realized it's not that easy. Yeah. There are nuances to things. Sometimes your kid is wired in a different way. Sometimes you might have your own wiring that makes it difficult to do things in a way that supports you or that supports your family.
Yeah.
So then I started having these conversations with moms, and I've always, of course, liked the idea of preventative care in medicine and talking about like brushing your teeth and potty training people and stuff. But it was so much more interesting to me, the very real conversations that I would have with moms when they couldn't breastfeed when they wanted to, or when they were getting angry at their kids and they had the book knowledge, but they couldn't figure out how to not snap at their kids. Mm-hmm. Or they felt like, gosh, like they tried to raise a picky eater, but they weren't able to. And so those conversations developed into this blog that I started writing that were all of the things that I wished if I had an hour and a half to talk to someone. And if I wasn't in my like official doctor patient relationship where I had to be really careful about the advice that I gave because it was so like direct, that I could just say what I actually wanted to say to these moms. So I started blogging, and people were super, super responsive to it. We put it on Facebook, we put it on Red Tricycle, like all of the parenting blog stuff. And people were like, oh my gosh, they're eating it up. Especially this one about like, I remember there's one, if your kid is being needy, maybe they're not being like an asshole because they want to be. Maybe they're being an asshole because like they need more of your attention. Yeah, like they need your attention, or they are having a hard time in their school, or because they haven't slept. Like maybe these are other factors that you need to consider. So I wrote the book. I wrote the blogs, and then eventually I started working with the American Academy of Pediatrics. And I worked with them to do 2 books. First was the New Baby Blueprint. And that book was about trying to support moms in that first critical month of life when they're really having a hard time. And then the second, which is what they requested actually that I wrote because they saw what was happening kind of in working families, was the Working Mom Blueprint. And the Working Mom Blueprint was this idea that we can talk about parenting and give advice until we're blue in the face. We can tell people in general what to do to be healthy or to be good people or to be good parents. But if we're not addressing more of like the personal growth issues, some of the deeper issues behind why people act the way they do, they will never be able to take our advice. They will never be able to implement the things that we're telling them to do. Yeah. So for adults that aren't parents, for example, like we tell people all the time, you should exercise, you should sleep well, you should like drink 8 glasses of water every single day, and nobody does it, right? Why? Like there's a whole host of reasons. It's a lot of times because people are too busy, or because they're stressed out, they have anxiety underlying. And same goes for parents. There were all these things that we were telling, especially working moms, to do, but they were unable to act on that advice or absorb it or take it in because of a number of factors. And so this book was about really increasing bandwidth for those primary caregivers. And out of that, really, we developed a podcast, we developed an app, we developed a weekly newsletter that goes out. We have a social media following. And I think people are really just drawn to this idea of vulnerability, of transparency, of like enough of the tropes and the memes and the like, you're an amazing mom, like more of like, please God, help me. Like yes. I'm having a hard time, So that became Modern Mommy Doc. And now I get to be in my clinic part-time, a very small part-time. And the rest of the time I get to meet with moms virtually and help them on a more national scale, which is amazing.
I seriously applaud you for that, because I feel like almost every single one of my clients, like a good portion of them who are moms, is overwhelmed. And I think that your mission is to help women basically end the cycle of burnout. But in a world where we are taught that we're supposed to do it all the time, it can be really hard to separate your productivity from your worth. And so I know that that's a really big and deep question to unpack, but what are some really small tangible tips that you might give one of your clients on starting to unravel that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head. I think that most moms carry around kind of the superwoman complex, and most women carry that around of like, my value is related to what I do. If I'm busy, that means that I'm a good person. My worth is tied to how many tasks that I checked off my checklist. And I really tell people or encourage people to start by asking why, with curiosity and with self-compassion. So why is it that I feel like I can't rest? Why is it that I feel like if I haven't done 10 things today, even on a vacation day, like that I'm not doing it right? And I've totally lived that myself. Like I go to Hawaii and I'm like a nervous wreck because I'm just sitting on the beach. If I don't have a book, then I must be doing something wrong because I'm not being productive, even on vacation, you know? And I think I'm not alone in that. And I think that there's a lot of societal pressures that we have on women to be the doer, be the person in the family. That is kind of running things constantly.
Yeah.
I also think that productivity can sometimes be a mask for mental health issues that we're not dealing with. So I think that that's another really great place to approach with some gentle curiosity about, is it that I have anxiety or that I have OCD, maybe even lingering from the postpartum period that I never fully dealt with? And so it actually feels more comfortable to me in some weird, twisted way to be constantly in motion, because when I'm quiet, my anxiety actually comes rearing back and I have a hard time being still. So those are kind of the things that I ask people to explore. And then in terms of tips of what would you do to deal with it, the biggest thing is to start small. I think that the people that have the hardest time doing things like meditation are the ones who need meditation the most, right? Yeah. Yes, myself included. And so I need it to be guided. I need someone else to help me do it. I need like an app and someone's voice telling me how to do it. I need it to only last for 5 minutes at a time when I'm in a season where I've gotten a little overproductive. So I think there's no shame in starting small, in using tools like technology to get yourself more mindful or more centered or to slow down. The other thing that I encourage people to do is to schedule in white space to their calendar. And I've had people tell me, like, I cannot do that. That's crazy. You told me I need to take 5 minutes a day for myself. Nobody has 5 minutes a day for them. Like, everybody has 5 minutes a day for themselves. So that could be in the car on your way to work. You turn the radio off. You turn your, Apple Music off or whatever. That could mean you sit outside before you come in and you just have it be quiet. That could mean you lock the door when you take a shower, like for 5 minutes, So I don't think it has to be something big or expensive to take care of yourself and to create moments. But I do think you have to be intentional about it, just because the way that things run in the world, the way America is, and the way things are just in general for moms, you're fighting the tide.
Yeah, totally.
Do you see this present with women prior to having kids? Obviously, you're making the argument that is greatly, I think you're making the argument that is greatly exacerbated once women have kids. I would probably argue that's the case with my wife. And like some of the things you were describing, I'm like, I told you to leave white space in your calendar.
I tell my clients to do that. Some days it's harder than others. But I think that what you're saying of like starting small and like actually having things where it could be as small as like locking the door when you take a shower, or like saying no to something that you don't really want to do. I think that most people don't recognize that that's a form of self-care. It really is. And so I think that is really true. But I like that question, because I think that for me, I was kind of a doer before I had kids. But since having them, and I went through a phase after my first where it got worse. And then now I'm in a place where it's much more like, I'm like, okay, I know that I need to rest. Otherwise I'm not going to be able to like wake up with my youngest at 3 a.m. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's exacerbated once you have kids. I think it's always present, probably for all of us on some level. And I think just from a societal perspective, it's there. But I think that when you become a mom, it's like you can't run away from your need for rest. Like, if you don't get the rest, then the pot boils over so much faster.
Yeah.
And that when you're not a parent, that finding moments when you kind of get to your edge, be like, oh, I'm so burnt out, I need to take a break. You're like, okay, whatever. When's the next flight to, Vegas, whatever, not that big a deal. Versus when you're a parent, it's easy to let everything kind of pile on top of you and to never, ever take that break.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that rest is such a big one because, like you said too, people aren't, women especially. Again, I saw this thing on Good Morning America, actually, that like women take on 6 times more responsibility in terms of kids and household stuff than men do, on top of already having a job. I don't know how true that is, but I saw that last week and I was like, wow, this really resonates. Because I think that that's what leads to that burnout cycle, because we also don't ask for help. And then we don't trust our intuition with that rest piece. It's like, I'm just overriding this because there's so much piling up on the to-do list. So I'm really grateful for for the tips that you've given our listeners, because I think that starting small is really key.
Yeah. I mean, I think to your point too, about the household work and dividing that up, you are absolutely right. That statistic is correct. Women are the she-fault parents in the majority of dual gender households in America. Mm-hmm. And I think there's multiple complex pieces though to that, of why it happens and why it's perpetuated. So I'll speak for myself. I know that in my household, we definitely meet together. We have business meetings, we call them, where we divide up tasks and responsibilities. But if those tasks and responsibilities don't get done, which sometimes they don't, because my husband has ADHD, so sometimes it's hard to get motivated or to do it or whatever. Sometimes I just will step in and do the activity because I am feeling so anxious or so pent up about it, or I'm so resentful that I'm like, fine, I'll just do it anyway. I'm just going to be the one that takes it on. And I think that happens in a lot of households where people decide, you know what, the argument's not worth it. The conversation's not worth it. I've had this argument before. I'm just going to be disappointed if I divide it up or try to have this divide and conquer mentality and it never gets done. So I think sometimes there's perpetuating circumstances that make that happen. I also think that there's societal and structural issues, right? Like policies at work for not being able to have paid parental leave for a dad and for a mom in a dual gender household. That makes it so, of course, the mom is going to be the person who becomes the expert at childcare a lot sooner on in their relationship with their child. Of course, then the other partner is going to be the helper, as opposed to the person who's the authority. And so that really plays into it too. I don't think this is all about man hating and women do everything and men don't care. I think some of this is the way that it gets set up at the very beginning and makes it so that my husband always defers to me. I don't know, how should we do this with, McKenna or Maria? Because he considers me the main point person, and he's the person who's my teammate.
Yeah, I think that's how society sets it up for us, for sure. It's oh, he has the 9 to 5. My job's more flexible. I'm the number one parent.
It's a function of society and familial path, though.
Yeah,
you always say, well, in my family, my mom chose where we went to school, what activities we did, and so you take that on.
Yeah, you're totally right.
But
yeah, I think so. Yeah, and the other thing that I think sometimes people maybe get a little caught up in is okay, we need change today. It has to be different today. I think it's a lot more
human nature.
Yeah, it's a lot more realistic and less disappointing for me to think about how my kids' kids will operate. Like, I want to move the needle slowly so that then that generation has full equity in their household. And I want me to have as much equity as possible. But I don't believe for a second that every single person I know is going to have a completely equitable relationship like tomorrow, just because I think it's a good idea. And we finally all got woke about it. You know, there's a lot of patterns.
For sure.
Hey fam, if you are listening here, then you may be someone who deals with chronic overwhelm, bloating, anxiety, and weight you can't lose, maybe hair loss or skin conditions. If one of those things rings true for you, the Wellness by Kelley Health and Hormones course is available to help you get to the root cause and solve the issue in a way that's sustainable and gives you your lifestyle with lasting results. No more diets or quick fixes, but real health and vitality for the long run. My course runs through everything from what labs to test for to what protocols to implement given what's off in your blood work. We cover a variety of hormonal imbalances and how to heal them, plus the mindset work that you'll have to do to change your habits. If you're ready for an environment where you can learn the tools and truly heal to feel your best, most aligned, light, confident version of you, then this course is for you. If you're feeling called to join the WBK Health and Hormones course, head to the link in the show notes to learn more, where you'll get my membership included with your purchase.
Let's shift gears here a little bit. I think that this is going to be an interesting topic. So I think I think about my 6-month-old, and he just got diagnosed with an ear infection, and I'm kind of the person. And again, I know there's going to be a lot of like people who have their opinions on this, but like I would rather do less antibiotics than more. And so I, tried to stay away from it for as long as possible, but we ended up going to the pediatrician for the second time last week. And she's like, it's an ear infection. You need to get him on antibiotics. And so I think that there's two different types of parents, right? There's the one who is like overly concerned. And then there's one like me who might be like not concerned enough. And so when you think about a child, like what's the right time to say, okay, it's time to go to the doctor. Like we need an appointment. Like my kid's sick.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple things to think about there. First of all, I don't think it's ever wrong to say we want to avoid as many antibiotics as possible. I think that every single doctor should think that way too. That's how I think. Like, I don't want you to have antibiotics. That's why I believe in vaccines, to try to avoid like extra hospitalizations, extra antibiotics, further issues down the road. So I think that should be a common goal for everyone, as few antibiotics as possible. I think that developing a relationship with your pediatrician and choosing a pediatrician that vibes with you and that shares common values with you is really important. You want to make sure that the person that you are working with as a team for your child's health respects you, respects your opinions, and has the wherewithal to be able to explain the trade-offs and benefits of every choice that you make. So to me, to me, the antibiotic question is about, okay, well, what's the trade-off? If we don't do antibiotics, we could have, what's the risk? We could have an exploded eardrum. We could have an infection that could go to the brain. We could have an infection that could like drip down, go to the lungs, cause an pneumonia. So we could have this kid be miserable. They could get dehydrated, right? There's all these risks. And sometimes the risk of that is very low, depending on how long the ear infection has been sitting around, or the age of the child, or what the circumstances are for the child.
Yeah.
The benefits might be, lower pain levels. It might be that you're able to go back to work. It might be that you don't spread infection to all the other kids in your house. I mean, there are very real factors that matter on that end as well. So I think the best clinicians are able to really clearly lay out, without personal investment, like other than just the wellness of your child. Okay, here's the risks. Here's the benefits at this exact moment. Here's another decision point that we have to be able to check in later and say, should we make a different decision? There's hardly ever a situation where someone comes in to see me and they're like, what should we do? And I'm like, it has to be this. Hardly ever. Every once in a while, someone is dying. No joke, from like appendicitis, they would die. And I say, you have to go to the emergency room. This is my recommendation. Go now. Mm-hmm. But that's like 1 in a million. 99% of the decisions I make with families are about, you could do this or you could do that. These are the things you need to consider. These are the other things you need to consider. The other thing I would say is being able to have a conversation with your doctor or your physician, either on like a chat or on an email or calling their office or going in. No pediatrician should be saying like, don't come in if you're worried. I think one of the biggest reassurances we can give people as healthcare providers is to be able to say, you're not bothering me if you come in and see me and have a question or want to talk with me. I mean, that's literally what we're there for. And I will tell you, like, a friendly person like yourself who wants to come in and say like, should I treat this person for the ear infection or not? That's like the easiest visit of my entire day. Right. So it's like not a problem here to come in and see me for that. So yeah, I think that's how I would approach it. I think there's some gray area there, you know, unless someone's getting really sick.
Yeah, I think that the reason that I asked is because I have a 2-year-old too, who is getting sick all the time. Like he's bringing home all his germs from preschool and he's sick all the time. So it's like, okay, where is the like fine line? And I think you did an excellent job at answering this in that the response is really, it should be in the decision and like the trust of your provider. Like if you trust your provider enough, then, and I think that was something that was hard for me at first, was like finding someone that I actually knew I could trust. I actually interviewed a bunch of people. And so I think you already answered the next question that I had, but like in terms of what you should be looking for when you are like, I think for a lot of women, when you're pregnant, you start interviewing providers. Is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of like the conversation piece?
I think the biggest thing, honestly, is not being afraid to switch. Your provider wants you to switch away from them. If you don't like your provider and you're not having a great relationship with your provider, believe me, it's hard on us as well to feel like it's like a constant battle or a constant feeling of like mistrust with somebody. That makes it easier on you and with your provider. And, gone are the days, I think for most people, of like paternalistic doctors who are like, it's my way or the highway. This is the way it is. If you're feeling like that's the way it is with your provider, you should find somebody else. I think we're better trained than that, the majority of us. The other things I think, though, to consider when you're considering which doctor works well for you, which provider, is the practice at large, because most of us work within larger systems. So I work in a private practice. That means that I have 12 other providers with me. You might not always see me, because I work, 2 to 3 days a week, depending on my schedule. You might talk to one of my nurses. You might want to come in on a Saturday. So we got to make sure we're open for that. Maybe you want to communicate via email, not calling. Maybe you want to make your appointments online versus having to pick up the phone and talk to humans. Like totally fair, so those factors matter too. Honestly, probably almost as much as the provider itself, just because you're going to be dealing with the ancillary stuff a lot.
Yeah.
I will say it took us some time to find the right pediatrician, because I come from, both my parents were doctors, and I was always taught that you should kind of be your own doctor as well. Do your own research, come prepared with your own information, and then choose the right doctor and clinician that will meet you in the middle, like you said, and kind of hear your concerns, et cetera. And then you can come to a resolution together. Candidly, that wasn't necessarily our experience, actually.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. Especially like with the first doctor that we saw as care for OB. I was, having a conversation with him before we found the doctor that we love. And he was like, oh, well, you're going to be induced on this day, and this is the way we're doing it. And I was like, whoa. Like, that's not what I want. And he's like, well, that's the way that we're doing it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to need to find someone else. And I did. But same thing goes for kind of what Chad was saying in terms of when we were interviewing. So it sounds like you're much more progressive than some of the people maybe here in Vegas, which I love. I think that's fantastic.
I think the American Academy of Pediatrics is doing a lot of work to move people in that direction.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think it's like anything else. I think people are realizing, like, listen, people have choices. There's Yelp, there's Google reviews. Like people are shopping around. They're not just going to settle. You know what I mean? I think things are like that with almost everything. You could go on Amazon and choose what rain boots you have. There's like 50 choices, I'm sure 50 years ago, people just went to Sears and bought the one pair of rain boots that was there, So times are changing.
Yes, for sure.
To be fair to the other side of the argument, though, I think there are parents and people out there that don't necessarily want choices. They want to go into their doctor and have a very clear and concise answer of, this is what I recommend.
Yeah.
So you have to be sympathetic to that.
I think that there's a doctor out there for everyone, right?
For sure.
And so I think that everyone is going to have a different opinion. And speaking of that different opinion conversation, I think that what we're here to do is have real conversations with full transparency. And a lot of people on Instagram know for us, like what we chose to do is a delayed vaccine schedule. And I know that there are a lot of different opinions on that out there. But I would love to know what that means for us is our first son started getting his shots this year when he turned 2. So do you see people choosing to do that? If no, not really in your practice, why not? What are your thoughts on vaccines before preschool? Do they need all of them? Kind of give us the gamut and the safety and efficacy, I guess.
Yeah. So I think that there is such a wide array of opinions in this area. Yeah. And I think that actually the COVID vaccine stuff has really brought this more to light. Like people understand more about vaccines than they ever have because we were talking about it for a while. We were talking about it like 24/7, right? So even the terminology, people had no idea about vaccines prior to the conversation about COVID. I think that when you're making a decision about vaccines, you just really want to check your sources. You want to make sure that if you're researching what you want to do for your child, because you are in control of what happens for your child's health, the information that you're using to make your decision comes from a reputable source. You want to make sure it's actually scientific. You want to make sure it's not just like a celebrity that has an opinion about it, but they don't have any basis, for it. So I think that's the most important thing. In our practice, this is what I tell people all the time when they're like, can I do a delayed vaccine schedule? And I go, listen, this is how I feel. I'm not going to, we don't chain people to the door and be like, you are not allowed to leave until you do vaccines. Like that's bad juju. And also I would never want you to feel like you can't come to me for other things for your child's health because you choose not to vaccinate. So like, I don't want to keep someone out of coming to see what I consider like a good practice, like mine, just because they don't want to vaccinate. What I tell them is, what you need to understand if you're not going to vaccinate kind of according to the schedule that the American Academy and the Centers for Disease Control have put out, is that it might mean that in your effort to be less invasive to your child, which makes total sense, that it might end up that we have to do more invasive things, even if we don't want to, if your child gets sick. Yeah. So it might mean that if your child gets sick and they're not vaccinated, some of the things that I would have had kind of like, okay, you're cool, you're covered for that, I will be going like, this could be one of those like weird, crazy things that maybe you haven't been vaccinated for. And so I might want to do more blood work. Mm-hmm. I might have to send somebody to a hospital. I might have to give somebody antibiotics in a case where I wouldn't otherwise do it. So, and then also you might have more doctor's visits if you're doing something on like an alternative schedule. So if your hope was to stay out of the doctor's office as much as possible, it might make it so now you're actually there constantly, or like your child's having more times where they're having reactions. So I think it's kind of the same thing as the ear infection question, where it's all about what are the trade-offs and risks that you're willing to assume? And is it coming from a place of you being super knowledgeable based off the research that's out there about the safety and the efficacy and where it's coming from? I just want to make sure that people aren't only looking on Facebook and their friends to decide what they're doing, right? Especially because we know Facebook and all the social media things are so algorithmic. Mm-hmm. Where like, once you look at one thing, you're going to see another one and then another one that just kind of like confirms your beliefs. So that's what I think is just be reasonable and like have an open mind as you're researching and as you're deciding what you want to do.
I think that that's really helpful information because I can say like full transparency again for our son, like, he didn't have any shots for the first 2 years of his life, but now he's in the office once a month getting shots to prep him for, he's in like kind of a fake preschool right now, but when he goes to real preschool, he has to have them. And so that wasn't something that we were worried about. And he isn't bothered by being there more frequently. He loves that he gets to get a lollipop every time he goes. But we had our other reasons for delaying it.
I'll tell you how we approached it because I was largely pretty adamant about this, to be very honest.
Totally.
And so I'd love your opinion on the vaccine book from Dr. Sears. I'm sure you've heard of it. And so I'd love your opinion after this. But I looked at each vaccine individually and I said, to your point, what's the risk reward profiling here? What is the risk of the disease or the illness actually, getting into our child? What's the risk of them getting sick versus what's the risk of vaccine injury? And what I gleaned is that in most cases, both are relatively low. Risk of vaccine injury is really low. Risk of them getting polio, some of these other illnesses, I guess polio is kind of back to an extent, but also were low. And so that's how I looked at it. I looked at each of them individually and then made decisions based on not only that, but what was in them, heavy metals, which ones were you combining with each other? And the second thing I looked at, which was interesting, was our scheduling. US has a much more accelerated schedule versus Europe from what I could gather. And so instead of at a 6-month appointment, they're getting, 6 or 8 shots, something like that. It's a bit more spread out. And so that's kind of how we did our assessment.
West is getting more frequent shots now, but overall he'll get less shots.
And then over a much wider period. And so, what are your thoughts on that? And maybe what drew America to get into this scheduling versus Europe? I'd be interested if you have an opinion on that.
I think what's most important from what I'm hearing from you is that you were thoughtful about it and that you were considering each vaccine as opposed to vaccines as a whole. I think that's really important that you were assessing each individual one, because there are differences between some of the vaccines and like the likelihood of getting something, and also the severity of disease if you were to get it, like hepatitis A versus like, meningitis, right? Like those are like very different things.
And then we have a second kid now. So pertussis, whooping cough, becomes a little bit more serious because now we have 2 kids. One's very young, 2-year-old could get it, bring it home, etc. But keep going. Yeah.
I also think, the pandemic was a completely different moment, right? Because generally speaking, the way we think about vaccines is this idea of herd immunity. So like the more people that have the vaccines, the less likely it is that you're going to have this bacteria or virus enter the community. And so in the pandemic, obviously, like that was kind of like out the window because you weren't like around anybody. You're home. So I can kind of accept the like delayed schedule a little bit more. I think there's also, I think we have to remember, and this is just human nature. It goes for anything like a proximity bias. So there's this thing that happens where if polio, the last case of polio was like 60 years ago, all of us just as humans will be like, I'm not getting polio. And then it comes back around, right? And then everybody's like, I need the polio vaccine right now, right? But the risk was always there that it could re-enter the community. Yeah. So I think that's also how public health and preventative health people like me think about things as well, of like, sure, the risk is super low, but then also it might be that it's right around the corner. And so I think that has to play into it too, but which you mentioned, that like measles came back around a couple of years ago, polio, we always have pertussis outbreaks. And it also depends on your community where you live. We live in a much more global community than we have in the past. So whereas you might have been able a long time ago to say like, hey, I just live in my little like Appalachian village, now it's like, well, you might be going to New York and to Paris and to Vegas with your, so I think that part matters too. But I think the way you were approaching it sounds absolutely reasonable. We have a lot of people that use the Dr. Sears book as a guide to your question about that. The one thing that I see happening with it is that sometimes people will get confused on their own schedule.
For
so
sure.
like,
Tough. So I like my own Excel and
you got to like
you got to be on top of it.
Organized.
Yeah,
so
you got to be organized.
So in our office, when we have people in alternative schedules, sometimes they'll say, "Can you make a plan for me?" And we're like, "Yeah, sorry, we can't," because it's just like that would be so many man hours. You know what I mean? Like our plan is the just original plan.
Yeah.
But if you want to come in, then every time you come in for a shot, you tell us what the next one is you want to schedule and what you want to do, and we'll follow that. And I see people sometimes when they're using the Dr. Sears methods or the other methods that are more alternative, sometimes, your kid will get sick, so then you don't end up getting a shot. So then you get busy and you forget to make the appointment. So then you never get it. And then now it's like too late, which might be okay. Or maybe they're off and they have to get a double. They have to restart the series or whatever. So I see that sometimes happening where when people are on a more alternative schedule or Dr. Steer's schedule, where it ends up being more appointments or things get a little bit muddied, or we miss something, honestly, as a provider office, just because we're not able to keep track in the same way that we normally would.
For sure.
Super helpful information. And I think that a lot of our listeners can gain insight of like what works best for them based on all of this. So thank you.
I mean, just in closing, here's, I think the real reality of the situation in my eyes is that we live in a world where people are probably the most, I don't want to make it seem negative, but selfish as they've ever been. And they want to make decisions that just impact them and their family. And so that is, you're right. But the reality is with vaccines, and I have two parents that are doctors, and we just know this from history, is that a lot of it does come down to like societal benefit. Like we as a society do these things to protect the broader society. We saw that with COVID, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so that's an underlining aspect that I think admittedly wasn't at the top of my mind at first, because you're just thinking about your baby and you want to do everything you can to protect them. And
that's why we waited. Yeah.
Came more to my mind. And so.
And that's a survival tactic. I mean, I think to be kind to yourself on that, right? That's like how we've all survived over, years and years and years, decades, is like centuries, is taking care of your own pack first. So that makes so much sense that people are that way. I also think what we're talking about is this idea of kind of making sure that you're not having black and white thinking, making sure that your thinking is nuanced, that you're considering all the different factors when you're making decisions. And we talked about that idea at the very beginning of, the self-care in the shower, like that's 5 minutes of self-care. In my position, I see all the time these things that are like, self-care is not selfish. Like you should like take care of you first. And I preach that too. I believe that you cannot be an effective parent or career person or human being if you are not deeply connected to your own needs and honoring yourself. And I think that there are some times that we cope with the stresses that we have in ways that cause collateral damage to ourselves or to others. So self-care, like quote unquote, no one can see my fingers, but self-care could mean to you, like, I have like a huge margarita and then I have like another one. And then I have like, 8 shots of bourbon on top of that, right? Like, okay, that's technically self-care. Like, it's probably not the best for you though. In fact, we know it's not the best for you, you going on like a vacation with your partner for a weekend, that's a great form of self-care. You never, ever seeing your kids and like pawning them off on other people every single moment of every single day in the name of taking care of yourself and going to yoga classes and like doing your nails. Like that's selfish. That's not good for your kids. Right. So I think we just have to think about in all of these things, what are the strategies that we want to take either for issues that come up like an ear infection that are acute issues that happen, or preventative issues like vaccine care, or things like taking care of ourselves as parents that will in the long run achieve the goal that we have for ourselves or for our people. Right. So I think that's the biggest takeaway for me always, and challenging myself to think about the nuances and to think about kind of like the why behind my decisions and to be responsive as opposed to reactive.
I think that that's super, super helpful because I think most women tend to think in that all or nothing black and white thinking just as a default. And I know I'm overgeneralizing there, but I guess I'm thinking of all of the women that I see in my practice, and it's something that's a hard thing to break. So it's like either I'm taking care of myself all the time or I'm not giving myself even 5 minutes. So the fact that you're talking about seeing that gray area is really important, I think, for most people, for everyone, to try to just challenge themselves a little bit more. I want to shift gears one more time. And I know we've taken a lot of your time already, but I think that talking about a couple of things in terms of, the way that we're raising our children, I'm sure you get a ton of questions about that, because that's the hardest part of being a parent, is like knowing what to do in those moments. And so as I mentioned, we have a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old. And they're in very different phases. With the 2-year-old, we're walking that fine line of trying to figure out what the right amount of discipline is. And if we like swear, he repeats it and like all of that different stuff. So what are your thoughts on the word no with toddlers? What are your thoughts on, maybe not letting them be themselves enough? And I think that like, hearing us, we definitely need to work on our potty mouths. But like,
like you guys heard me, like for those who are joining us at this moment, before we started recording, I literally told my daughter, like, if you're going to be in this room, I'm going to be swearing. So choose if you want to be here or not.
I love that approach. That's my approach. I'm like, they're going to learn it anyway. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a bad parent.
No, there's a time and a place.
Right.
So, okay, here's the thing with no. No is not a bad word. No is a super effective word. Kids need to hear the word no. We all hear the word no as part of being human, right? If we can't tolerate hearing the word no, we're going to be really like sad and dejected. I think that there are some major parts of our society that are broken because people never told a young person no. And then now they think that everything should be a yes for them all the time, right? Sometimes you don't get a job. Sometimes you don't get to like, I don't know, sit in the seat that you wanted, whatever. Like sometimes it's just a no. I think what happens though, is that you want to make sure you don't dilute the power of your no. So you want to save your no for the times that you really want your child to hear it. The same, honestly, with raising your voice, the same with being like super firm with your kids. You want to save those so that way your kid doesn't just ignore it and go, oh, they say no all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Oh, they yell at me constantly. I guess that doesn't mean anything either. There are moments like if your child is actually, my daughter did this when she was like 3. If your child is running out of a grocery store into the supermarket parking lot and there's a car coming, that is a very appropriate time for you to scream no, and then to like get in their face and be like, what are you doing? I mean, that is an appropriate time.
Yeah.
It's not appropriate for you to do that when they're trying to grab an apple off the stack of apples in the fruit and vegetable area. So there's a difference between when you want to use that and use other strategies. And you just want to make sure you're using as many tools in your toolbox. I think the big thing that parenting experts talk about is this idea of being firm but loving. So authoritative parenting, where you're able to say, you're still able to hold your kids to a high standard, but you're able to maintain your own sense of calm when you're doing it.
Right.
I know that I am out of alignment with the parent that I want to be when I am so riled up that I can't control myself. Yeah. When I'm so riled up that I'm just like operating out of full frustration. Or when I'm so overwhelmed that I'm operating out of like, whatever, just do whatever you want. I'm in the best place when I'm aware, when I'm rested, hence this need for self-care and for like, having some value, living by your values. And when I can really like choose the way I'm talking, get down on their level, look them in the eye, say, this is what I expect out of you. This is either the positive thing you can gain by doing this, or this is the reward that you can have if, or this is the consequence that you'll have if you don't do the thing that I'm asking you to do. So I think that's the balance with the word no. The other thing that I want to
explaining yourself enough, like I think explaining why you're saying like what you said, like what the consequence is and like why you're doing what you're doing is so important for them to understand, like getting on their level.
Well, one thing that works especially well for us, and I gleaned it from a book that was recommended to me by many people. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called Parenting with Love and Logic. Mm-hmm. And they were saying, if you can, try to position things as a choice. And so the choice may be, do you want to hit your brother in the head and go to your room? Or do you want to stay down here
and stop doing that?
Stop doing that. And it's actually been
it's effective,
wildly effective. And our kid is receptive.
And there are still times where we tell him no. There like definitely are times.
To her point.
Yeah.
To her point. Right. But, if it's no, I think, to her point, very specifically, you lose the value of it. So,
yeah.
It needs to be authoritative and they need to be responsive when it really matters.
Yeah. I think the other thing I want to mention for people is I think that it's confusing to be a parent right now. I think that our parents, it was simpler for them. My family was like, hey, you do something wrong, here's a spanking, and here's a timeout. Like that was it. And there's like no tolerance for bad behavior. I was very well behaved in the moment, and it worked for short-term obedience. And there's nothing like wrong with some of that. Now the mantra is like every single thing needs to be that you're emotion coaching your kids. You need to like be like loving at all times. You can never raise your voice. Timeouts are bad. I mean, that's so confusing because I think in our core, we're like, oh, I would never behave like this. I would have never gotten away with this. So I think there's a happy medium. And I think that's where Love and Logic comes in. I think that the books that are by Ken Ginsberg from the American Academy of Pediatrics come in that talk a ton about raising teenagers. He has stuff for older parents, how to talk so kids will listen and listen so kids will talk. That's an amazing book that really teaches people scripts for how to get people to young humans to do what you want them to do in the moment without like losing all your power or getting trampled. Because I think that that's sometimes how it feels when we're not being as hard and strict as our parents were.
That is gold. I think that people will link those in the show notes, but I think that's really great to have those resources for people. And so on the other hand, we also, like I said, have a 6-month-old, and one of the things that's a little controversial is like what to feed them when. And we just started, giving him solids recently.
Hold on. Before we go to that, I want to hear how you deal with tantrums, because I know you wrote a guide on it, and I'm downloading it, but I didn't get a chance to look at it because, my gosh, they're just hourly at this point. So give some quick tips before we go into the babies with food narrative around like how you deal with those and what your best practices are.
Sure. Okay. Number one, figure out why it's happening. So if it's because they're hungry or they're tired or you've taken way too many errands, you got to just call it and address like their basic need first. Okay. Yeah. So always go for basic human needs as the first step. Number two is it's something that is emotion based and it makes sense. So it's like, Johnny took my toy and I'm having a tantrum. Okay, that's a moment where you get down on their level, you name the emotion for them, you validate the emotion. You feel angry. It makes sense that you feel angry because Johnny took your toy. You give that pause with the emotion coaching, and then you say, okay, so now what are we going to do? Or you think of a solution for how it gives you the breath and it gives your kid the breath to be able to figure out what you're going to do next. Third situation is when your kid is acting like a full-on brat and they're at the toy store and you're like, you cannot have that toy. I've set the limit. Or maybe you tell them before you even went in and they still are like, I want it. That's the no. we don't do this. And then if it keeps up or escalates, so you're like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, that means that we have to leave the grocery store. So I think there's like 3 different scenarios as to what the type of parenting is, because there are different reasons why it's happening. And so the solution has to be different.
That's great.
Love it.
I think I'm definitely going to do more of the emotion coaching. I need to be more aware of when he's doing that versus when he's just doing like the thing with the toy.
Well, that's every time he goes into Target.
Oh, I know.
So we got to work on that one.
Also, I really try not to bring my kids with me to Target. You know what I mean? Like,
it's a good call.
Or if I do, I have the most strict, like we're going in there. We wrote it down with checky boxes, the 3 things we're buying. You know what I mean? So that way it's like, nope, we said it. Remember, look at the list. I can't fear for the list.
Don't go anywhere near the Paw Patrol aisle.
Yes.
So yeah, we have our youngest. He's just starting to eat solids. I think that there is a lot of controversy. My best friend, she put on her Instagram that she started giving her kid solids when she was 4 months, and she got all of this backlash and hate for it. Because she's like, that's too young. And then like, I haven't put this on my Instagram, but like my 6-month-old, we gave him peanut butter. And I know that a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, you're supposed to wait till a year. So can you give us your thoughts on solids? Is it fine to just like blend up what we're having for dinner? That's what we typically do. But give us your thoughts on that for someone who is a new parent.
Yeah. And when do you recommend
starting?
Situations are very different, but when do you recommend, discontinuing breastfeeding, or what's the period that is really necessary? Is it 6 months, a year, et cetera? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that too.
Sure. Okay. So any time between 4 to 6 months is fine to start solid foods. So they shouldn't have given your friend flack. What really matters is that the child as an individual is ready. So that means that they can sit up supported, that when you put a spoon to their mouth, they don't immediately spit it all out, that they're able to swallow, and that they have good head and neck control. So that's actually what you're looking for, as opposed to the actual age that they are. And like most things, honestly, with parenting, that's what you're looking for, is like, how is my individual child ready versus like, did they meet it to the date? Right. The allergy thing, that has totally changed over the past like 5-6 years. So they used to say you should wait until a year to introduce all allergens. Now I can't even think of the name of the allergy council, but like the people that decide what's happening with the allergies have said that we should start introducing allergenic foods as soon as possible. So that actually, if you're breastfeeding, that you should be eating as many allergenic foods as possible when you're breastfeeding, so it gets transferred in through the milk. And that really starting at 4 months, it would be totally fine to have a little bit of peanut butter or a little bit of egg or a little bit of shellfish graze your baby's lips. It's just about exposure. So you don't need to like feed your baby a peanut, and please don't, because then they're going to choke on it, right? But like a little tiny bit of something is great for exposure, and you want it to be early and often for the allergens. Waiting a couple days in between starting new foods is a good idea, so you can just make sure what's happening with it. And then there's been this huge controversy, again, black and white thinking about like baby-led weaning versus purees. It does not matter. What matters the most is that it's safe and that your child doesn't choke on it. So baby-led weaning, I like to use the word baby-led feeding, actually, could mean that you are like having a soft piece of a vegetable or a fruit that's super soft that you know your baby is not going to choke on, and that they have that in their hand and they're like feeding themselves with it. Yeah. Or that they're doing that through like a mesh feeder. Or it could be that you grind something up and make it into a thin puree and that you're feeding your baby that. So I think there's room for all of it. It's just about making sure you're not doing like raw vegetables, nuts, grapes, like huge bits of food that a baby's going to choke on. And maybe most important and most difficult for families, that you're actually sitting there supervising your child without being on your phone, so that you could watch if there was a problem that happened.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I think that what we have implemented, I think it's been like a year or so now, where we don't do phones when we're eating. That's something that we've worked a lot on. But I think that before that, it was definitely a problem for our family for sure. And so I think that there's a lot of people out there that need to hear that, to pay attention.
Yeah. I'm just terrified of choking too. She knows this. I have like this emergency device that, like, if shit really hits the fan, I can put it to his face.
Oh my God. That's awesome.
Like, there's nothing more terrifying for me, or at least with our first kid, I've eased up a little bit than that look they make when they have something stuck in there. So
it's the fear that's gotten him off of his phone.
small caveat. Yeah. So you gotta eyes open, parents. Do you think that exposing allergens to babies at an earlier age actually prevents the allergic reactions in the future, or is it more just testing their responses?
No, that's what the studies are showing, that actually introducing the allergens earlier on might be a preventative factor in terms of them developing allergies. So, and there's a lot of new research that's coming out about like, when we wash the babies, what's called vernix caseosa, when they're first born, that might cause barriers, the skin barrier to be basically compromised in the beginning. So that's like that white cheesy stuff that's on a baby. Mm-hmm. You wash that off, that might really compromise the skin barrier and make it so that more allergens can like be introduced into the skin. There's a lot of stuff about the gut microbiome and what happens like in a C-section, or if you've gotten antibiotics and how that might make it so that you're more prone to allergies or to issues with your gut. So it's kind of fascinating, actually, all the different things about how we're kind of messing with biology, and it's making it so that we're having more problems later on.
Yeah, for sure. I think that I want to be really sensitive to Chad's question about the breastfeeding thing, because I breastfed both my boys for 6 months. But I think that we have to be really aware of the fact that there are women out there who just can't. And that's just not an option for them. So while I would love your opinion on what you think is like the most effective, or what you think research shows is the most effective for building an immune system and stuff like that, there are those women out there that just,
of course,
that just can't. And so we have to have a soft spot in our heart for them.
Okay, you're going to be happily surprised by my response to this question. I want to also say, because I mentioned the C-sections and the antibiotics, there are times where people need a C-section in order for a baby and a mom to live. So please, no shame if you had a C-section, no shame if you needed to receive antibiotics. It's just that we're starting to gain more information about what we need to do to kind of like mitigate the effects on our microbiome or on our skin as a result of that, and allergies. Okay, so I am super proud that in my first book, The New Baby Blueprint, I really went to bat. I don't want to say against the American Academy of Pediatrics, because we definitely were in cooperation and collaboration on this. I went to bat, I feel like, for women to say, we have to include a section that says, if you are not able to breastfeed, this does not make you less of a mom. If you choose not to breastfeed, this does not make you less of a mom. There are a myriad reasons why that happens. Some by choice, some totally by biology, or something that is completely out of your control. Sure, there are tons of benefits to breast milk itself. There's also a lot of different ways to get breast milk into a baby. And there's also really cool technology that's happening within formula to make it so that we're able, for babies who are not able to get breast milk, to have a mimic, a very, very strong mimic of some of the amazing qualities of breast milk. So you should not feel ashamed if you're unable to breastfeed. You should not feel like you're less of a person or less of a mom, or you're doing damage to your baby. I also think, I have seen this for sure. I don't think, I know it because I've seen it time and time again, that there are some moms who become so challenged from a mental health perspective with their attempts to breastfeed that it like overshadows anything else that they're doing as a mom, and makes it so they don't sleep. It makes it so that they're angry. It makes it so that they're anxious. It makes it so that a connection with their baby and that enjoyment of those early months is like decimated. And so I really care about the whole person. What's happening with this mom and her child, and how are they bonding? And that matters so much. We know the neural connections that happen between a mother and her baby, and a father and her baby, or they, them and their baby, whoever. You know, it really, really matters the way that you are, the way that you're vibing basically with your baby. The American Academy of Pediatrics says if people can breastfeed until they're until their baby is 2 years old, there are benefits to that. I'm going to be honest. I don't know anybody that's breastfeeding their baby until they're 2 years old. For sure, not working moms. I think it's hard enough to get to 6 months. We know that most people drop off after a week or a month. So I don't know that we need to put loftier goals on people that can't reach the 6 months to 1 year goal in the first place. And thankfully, in their policy that they put out about that having some benefit, they actually did address that, because of our lack of infrastructure to support moms in those early days, our lack of lactation specialists, our lack of paid parental leave, our workplace strategies, once people do go back and they're trying to pump, like there's a whole host of reasons why we are basically like the worst industrialized country when it comes to breastfeeding, that have nothing to do with a mom's effort.
Yeah, 100%. I work for a Canadian company. They're much more with it.
Yeah. I think that I mean, Chad knows this, like candidly, to me, and again, like everyone is different and everyone's experience is different. I know his sister, like she did make it to 2 years. She breastfed her girls till 2 years, and like she loved the experience. Like the sole reason that I did it for as long as I did was because I like I wanted to respect his wishes and what he wanted to. And also like, I know that there's a benefit to my boys for it, but like, I hated it. I hated every moment of it. I felt like it was like another 6 months of me not having my own body. And so I think that acknowledging to like that everyone's experience is going to be different is important. And that, we all have needs as parents, but we all have like preferences too. And so your preferences are going to be different than someone else's.
We should just be thankful that we live in a society where if you're unable to, there are
options. Yeah.
Versus, in the Stone Age, you're unable to, there aren't really any options. Yeah. And so
for sure,
everyone has their own choices. And luckily we've developed great technologies, to your point, for babies to be healthy in either direction.
Well, Dr. Whitney, thank you for your opinions on this, because I think that it gives people more comfort in their, I think that we can be really self-critical about this kind of stuff. So thank you for kind of opening that door for people.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you. I hated breastfeeding too. I'm a pediatrician. It was like the worst 2 years of my life. I hated it. It's terrible. I could never wear anything I wanted to wear. All my clothes got ruined. It was just so bad. And yet I did it, for the benefit of my kids. Like it's all good. I'm glad I did it. Yep. And also I feel the pain of like, everybody's different circumstances. So yeah, I think the more we can be open and transparent about how we really feel about things, the better in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, here I am saying, I think you should do it for a year. Many guys wouldn't do it at all. I'll be honest. Like when you sit into that scene,
after a week,
I drop off after 2 days. So God bless the mothers and the women in this world, because I don't think procreation would be as transparent or prolific if it wasn't for you guys. So appreciate that.
So we know, based on everything we kind of said in the intro and what you've told us today, you have a lot going on. So can you tell us how at the end of your day, like after you get off this podcast, how are you going to disconnect your energy and all the to-do lists? Like what is something that you do for yourself? Or do you have like a routine and ritual where you come home from the end of your day?
Yeah. So my favorite thing to do that's with my kids at the end of the day is like spontaneous dance parties. We are such a music and dance family. I think my husband knows like every single word to every single Broadway musical. And I'm a big like hip hop and pop fan and all that. So my kids and I love to like go into a room, have music playing. It's a song that I know they love to sing or dance to, and like swing them around and dance. I think that energy of like shifting things from work mode to play mode is important. It doesn't happen every single day, but we do a lot of that in the car. Like if we're driving to an after school activity and we want to kind of change the mood, or if it's the end of my work day and, there's signal to be like, okay, the podcasts are over, the writing is over. It's time to move into family mode. So I think that's a big one. The other thing is outdoor space. I live in Portland, so it's rainy, but it's absolutely beautiful. And so I always tell people it's kind of like you live in Hawaii, because it's like rainy and then it's like sunny and then it's rainy, then it's sunny, except for it's like 40 degrees cooler than in Hawaii. So not quite as pleasant. But I try to get outside as much as possible. If I can disconnect and be in nature, even for a walk around the block by myself or with my family, that helps me really shift gears and take myself out of the to-do and the productivity mode for sure.
Yeah, nature does it for me too. Everyone knows that though.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. We are so grateful. I feel like there's so much goodness that people can take away from this episode. And even if you're not a parent, like the amount of tips and tools that you have given our listeners for taking care of themselves, I think is invaluable. So thank you so much for your time.
It was absolutely my pleasure.
Can you tell our listeners where they can find you if they want to work with you? I don't know. Do you do Zoom? Like, what does that look like? And like, just give all of your social tags. We'll include them in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So I hang out the most on the gram. You can slide into my DMs there. And so I'm there, and we try to be like as real and raw as possible. We just had a post the other day that was like, the Titanic, and it was like what you thought life would be like with your parenting partner, and it was Jack and Kate like on the bow of the ship, that like thing where they have their arms on each other, and then we're like, what it actually is like, and it was like a sinking ship. So we try to keep it real on the ground. And then so that's at Modern Mommy Doc. And then you can also find our app on the Apple Store. It's Modern Mamas Club. And that's where you can get our podcast. You can get all of our guided lessons. We have interactive tools where you can even say like, this is how I'm feeling about my parenting today. Or this is how I feel about my career today. And then there's like algorithmic little voice notes that I've left you that help to encourage you or to guide you to another part of the app so that we can get resources or get motivation or be connected with specialists who can help you. And then our website is modernmommydoc.com. You can find all my books, all the podcasts, all the information about me there.
Thank you so much. Everyone go check out her Instagram. It is truly hilarious, and real and raw, and also very helpful at the same time. So, thank you again. And we look forward to hopefully speaking with you at some point for a part 2, because this was super helpful.
You bet.
Thank you.
We really hope that you enjoyed that episode. You can follow me on Instagram at Wellness by Kelley. And if you're new around here, you can sign up for the WBK 7-day free trial, where you can get access to all of my low impact workouts, blood sugar balancing, plant-based recipes, and guided meditations, all available on wellnessbykelly.com and on the WBK app.
Hey, thanks for listening.
Please make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also connect with us on social media at Wellness by Kelley. Drop us a DM for who you want to hear from.